So, good afternoon, Michel. My guest today is Michel van de Bogaard. This is indeed the first take on hopefully a longer series of conversations with CFOs. Michel, I'm extremely happy and grateful that you accepted the opportunity to come to speak with me today about your role as a CFO, your development, perhaps a couple of private anecdotes to share about your journey, trajectory. Mm-hmm. So really very happy that you're here today. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Stefan. As you know, I've been coming to Erasmus almost every year for the past 8 years, providing the guest lecture on your subjects in management, accounting, and control, or financial decision making. I'm always very glad to be here and share whatever little insights I have.
Yeah, that's really great. So thank you very much. Now, Michel, one of the reasons, of course, why I invite you back every year is, not only because you're, of course, an extremely nice guy, but also because you have a lot of experience. You've accumulated a lot of experience over the last 20 years or so in various roles, in various multinational companies, and done in recent years also more and more private equity-backed firms. So a few stations that perhaps should be mentioned were Shell, that you have been working with. You've worked with Heineken. You've had a position at Cannondale for some years. You worked also, I think, in the flower business, right, with Flamingo Horticulture, and then ventured out more into the digital services like Sentia and now Signicat. So I think, it's a really impressive career that you have made, and I really hope that today we can touch a little bit upon the various experiences that you have made over those years.
Yeah. It's funny that you say that, right? Because the career that you have built, if you also look at, if I look back, a lot of that is also happened a bit by chance. At least some of the choices I've made were driven by, okay, I'm not enjoying myself here. I want to do something else, right? And I just want to try something else. And then if you look back now, I've been working for now 27 years. All of a sudden you have a career. I think it was Confucius who once said, experience is like a lamp you hang on your back and it only illuminates the road you've already traveled. But I think it's also interesting for younger people who think you can plan your career. Not really, I think. I'm more a believer of the fact that you can have a career and it can be quite diverse. And it's really up to you which path you choose. And if you choose the wrong path, there's nothing stopping you from getting off that path and choosing another one again, right? Yeah. So I think that's also how I've looked at it always.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you mention that, because it happens very often that students approach me after class and they say, Stefan, what do I need to do in order to become a CFO? And then I always tell them, well, it's good to, first make sure that you learn as much as possible in your during your university studies. But really, the path is, not as clearly laid out as you might think. So that's very interesting. That mirrors your experience.
Yeah, I think that does mirror my experience. I think maybe we'll talk more in depth about it, but definitely, I think when they're students, underestimate how much of the basics and fundamentals are going to be so important for the rest of their career. So I'm still referring back in my day-to-day to basic economic principles, to the basics of accounting, to the basics of management control, and some basics of incentives and behaviors that really drive my day-to-day work. Right. So I'm always surprised actually how much tools I was already given when I went to university, and I studied in the University of Maastricht. And actually when I went there, maybe that's an interesting story to tell, I had done economics and I had done business economics in high school. Economics was really interesting to me, so I was really interested in macroeconomics and in government and those kind of things. And I basically sucked at business economics. I didn't get it. I didn't get it. I didn't, I learned journal entries not the system, but I just learned the journal entries. And I figured it was just something you had to know from the top of your head and not something that was a system.
Yeah.
And then I thought, oh, I'll do economics and then I'll gravitate toward macroeconomics. But then I was in my first year, and then all of a sudden it all clicked on business economics. It all clicked on finance and accounting. Hey, this is about a system. This is about, grasping the fundamentals of an organization and the business. It's actually sort of a language. And that sort of like put me on a path towards more and more finance and managerial accounting and business decision support that I hadn't thought about at all when I started at university.
That's really interesting. Yeah, they also always say about accounting that it is the language of business, right?
Yeah.
And I think there is something to that. Now, speaking, of course, about already kind of the start of your career, which began at Maastricht University, can you perhaps walk us a little bit through your career and also your journey to becoming a CFO? So could you perhaps speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, that we can, and maybe the people in the booth can pull up our PowerPoint. Yes, excellent. So I always make this slide when I'm introducing myself when I join a new organization, and it may become apparent that I generally see now in my career that I'm changing every 3 to 5 years from employer, because basically then the job is done. But I always try and explain a bit about who I am. The Michel van de Bogaard model was built in 1972. And I went to study in 1990 in the Maastricht University. And like I said, I just wanted to study economics because I thought it explained a lot about the world I was seeing around me. At that time, I was reading the newspaper, I was interested in politics. And I really thought that, economics was a bit like the hidden language, the hidden mechanism behind a lot of things. So I wanted to learn and understand more. And I had a good economics teacher at high school. So I thought, okay, I'll do that. And that business economics, I did it, but I really wasn't that good at it. But then at the university, more and more, I gravitated towards majoring in finance, so corporate finance, and management accounting and control. I enjoyed that a lot. In 1996, I started working here in Rotterdam at Royal Dutch Shell. So that was my first employer. And I started in the retail business, which is a bit odd. But in 1996, it was still the time when on Sunday you couldn't go to a supermarket because the supermarkets were closed. So if you wanted to have something, a bag of chips or a bottle of Coke, you had to go to a petrol station. And that was changing. And Shell then decided, okay, we are going to make that non-fuel retail business, basically the shop, we're going to make that something that can compete and that can really become a convenience store. And what Shell did then, they brought in a lot of people from retail businesses into their organization. And they added me to that outfit so that I could collect new management information for that new part of the business that they had not been exploring, because they were all about the fuel. They were about the sort of like the front court and the petrol, but they also wanted to have that shopping experience. And they were smart enough to say, okay, we don't have it, but people that are coming from Albert Heijn or from other companies do have it, and they got it in. So my first job was a real job. I didn't have a traineeship. I had a real job, and it was all about change, IT, and management information. And that sort of like got me a bit spoiled because it was really transformative. It really something changed in the business. We were adding a business line, and I really enjoyed doing that, having that responsibility, working in a team, and doing something that hadn't been done before. That I did for 2 years, really enjoyed myself. And then they moved me to Pernis, which is a totally different area of Rotterdam, and where I was in base chemicals. And I really had to make models about transfer pricing, debottlenecking a chemistry plant. So that was really different. And at the same time, I was here at Erasmus University getting my degree as a registered controller, with an executive master of financial control, as it is now called. So I was doing that, and I was really enjoying myself, spending my Fridays here on campus and learning that. And in the meantime, I was what was called an economist for base chemicals and lower olefins. That was literally on my business card. So very difficult to explain what I exactly was, but I worked a lot with Excel. And then they decided to do some divestments, and they asked me to be the last finance director of a polystyrene plant in Breda. So all of a sudden, I was sitting in a management team. I was in a smaller organization, and they asked me to help sort of like prepare that unit for sale and sort of like cut the umbilical cord with the mothership shell and prepare it for new ownership. And I also did that, enjoyed that a lot. That was done. Then I went into an incubator, Shell Technology Ventures. We started a company called Twister, which had to do with gas processing. And there were also 3i and JP Morgan as shareholders. So then I literally had to build a company from scratch, and I had to build an admin from scratch. I had to build procurement from scratch, payroll, HR function. That was all part of my remit. So that was really, really a good learning experience.
Steep learning curve.
Yeah, a very steep learning curve. I always call it my pressure cooker, because it was really a really ambitious business case with a beautiful hockey stick for a very specific new technology that hadn't really been field tested that much. So the plan was overly ambitious, a lot of big shareholders. So it was really trying to get everything tied together and making certain, we could pay our bills, but also project to the future, try prototypes out, sell those to customers at a lower price than we had initially thought about, so that we could at least get some testing data.
So really an internal startup.
Yeah, really an internal startup, basically, yeah. So it started as an internal startup, and then literally I resigned and became an employee of that company. And really tried to make it work. And I spent a few years trying to do that, worked a lot of hours. And in the end, we had to basically admit that we were too ambitious and that we basically had to scale it back a bit and, revert to basically majority of Shell ownership again. But the company still exists, and actually the technology is actually working and being implemented. So I think that's the cool thing about it. But we were, I think, just slightly too ambitious. So also that is a good learning, because as a finance person, if somebody tells you, okay, this is how it's going to work, and you put it in your model, Excel won't lie, right? But as a finance professional, more and more I learn that I have to challenge assumptions.
Exactly.
And that I have to say, okay, but why do you believe that, right? Why do you believe that in a very conservative industry, a new technology will be adopted within a 5-year time frame? And I was too immature, too inexperienced to ask those questions at that time. And in retrospect, if I would have maybe asked them, we would have all gone like, maybe we need to have a different timeline and a different funding program. But that was very useful to go through. And literally, if you start building an admin from scratch, you really know, how to think in journal entries and how to set things up. And that was really quite a good experience. Then I went to the head office of Shell, and I did a lot with treasury and taxation. It's a bit of planning. And that's actually, I always tell people, the one place in the head office where you can make money is by treasury and tax planning, right? So it's by allocating the right amounts to the right entities and making certain that you hedge the right risks. And that was what I did at that time. Then I had been 9 years with Shell. I really felt like, okay, I had enjoyed a lot of retail experience, the startup experience. I enjoyed less the sort of like capital intensive long-term projects, which Shell is very good at. That's their bread and butter. That's their core business. But I felt a bit in my body that I needed a bit more, dynamic environment, a bit more commercial environment. Let's say it like that. I mean, Shell can also be dynamic, but I wanted more commercial. That's when I joined Heineken.
I see.
In 2005. I joined in Zoeterwoude, became the finance manager of basically the on-premise and off-premise business, so retail and horeca. And that was really a commercial-driven organization. You really, as a finance person, had to make a lot of contact with the commercial discipline. You had to know the facts as well as they do. You needed to speak their language about margin, promoter scores, top of mind awareness, all of those marketing KPIs. You had to know how a decision on a new product and a new packaging type would impact your supply chain and how that could impact your margins. So it was really where I learned business partnering, I would say.
Did that also mean that you actually visited part of the Horeca? So did you go to restaurants and cafes and talk to the people? Or?
In Heineken, that's called a market visit, right?
Uh-huh.
So where you learn the market, which basically means you spend a lot of time in pubs and restaurants. So I think
That doesn't sound too bad.
No, it doesn't sound too bad now, and especially at that age, it was still doable. But I think I've gained 5 kilos in the first 3 months because all of a sudden I was back in bars and pubs a bit more than I was used to at that time. So, but I enjoyed myself tremendously. And then the company decided to do some consolidation within Europe, and they asked me to go to Egypt.
Oh.
And that had been a company that they had acquired from an Egyptian entrepreneur, which had been a state brewery that the government had privatized. They had put an Egyptian entrepreneur who had bought it, and he had basically sold it to Heineken. And
what was the legal environment about alcohol in Egypt at that time?
Well, basically, so alcohol is haram, so it's forbidden for people that have a Muslim background. But we had a license, so we were legal in that sense because we supplied a lot to the touristic areas,
right.
And there is a large Christian minority in Egypt. But in some areas, people perceived us like we would perceive a drug dealer here in Europe, right? So we were not a welcome guest at some events, let's say it like that. But we had a license, and that meant that we were allowed to make beer, we were allowed to make spirits, we were allowed even to make wine. So we had a full license for the manufacturing and distribution of alcohol in Egypt. Actually, the only one. So we actually had a natural monopoly nearly. Yeah. Although you could import, and there was a lot of illegal import, but the import duties were extremely high. Yeah. So it was on paper a very favorable situation.
Yeah.
But the company at that time had been managed for growth, had not been necessarily managed for profit or cash. Uh-huh. So when I arrived, and I was one of the first members of Heineken that came to that company as then, somebody in the management team. And that turned out then to be like, okay, well, we bought this beautiful company in this beautiful country with a lot of history, but we're not making any money, right? So then the journey started again from sort of like, how do we clean this up? How do we turn this around? And that was a very exciting time. So with a lot of people that I'm still in contact with today, both my peers in the management team, my boss, as well as the people who worked for me in Egypt. And we really started looking at, okay, what are the basics here? Well, how many products do we have? What's the margin on those products? So we use tools like activity-based costing to really reveal how much margin we were making. And then what you find out, especially in the market where you have a high market share, is that probably the top 10 SKUs drive 80% of your profits, right? Yeah. And then you have a long tail, as we call it, which doesn't add that much, but does add a lot of what I always like to call unrewarded complexity to your supply chain. Yeah. And that's where we started to look, okay, how can we clean this up? Yeah. What can we do with pricing? Can we make packaging better? And then we had created, or they had created, the previous owners, quite a large support structure with a lot of manual work. So literally every morning I would get a pile of checks on my desk and purchase requests that I had to sign by hand. So nothing was automated.
So which year was that?
This was somewhere like in 2007, 2008, when I was in Egypt. That's when I started. Yeah. I was up there up till and including Arab Spring. So.
Oh wow. Okay.
So that's
maybe we'll get to that as well.
We'll get to that. Yeah.
So a lot of manual.
A lot of manual work. So a company, I think, that didn't make a lot of profit and had like 6,000 people on the payroll, which was quite large for the sort of like production volume we had. And basically, by the time we left, we had implemented SAP as a ERP system. We had been the first in Africa for Heineken to do that. And basically, we could normalize and sort of like right-size the company to more like 2,000 people. Because you also have to count distribution people riding trucks. Yeah. But we really had right-sized the company. And we had turned it into a very profitable company. Yeah. Because we had, we placed our bets on the right products. We had a good brewery, We had expanded the portfolio with some wines. We had soft drinks. We had spirits, and those were running quite well in both the domestic market and say the tourist area.
Yeah. And so did it? So the turning this business into higher profitability, was that a matter of cost reduction, disinvesting from unprofitable products, or even expanding market share, or a combination of all of them? Or what was the key driver there?
Yeah, the key driver was, I think, indeed looking at, okay, what is the ideal suite of products? Do we need that many SKUs? So also, or testing. I think experimenting is also very important when you're in a business, and using your information about, for example, margins and profits of certain products. So we knew that we had a large pool of a certain soft drink that we were selling in large PET bottles, and the pricing was such actually that once it left the gate, it was already lost.
Okay.
So we first had to discover that, and once we discovered that, we said, okay, we need to increase the price. What would it do to market share?
Yeah.
And we had an assumption about how much we would lose and if it then would still be profitable.
Yeah.
We increased the price and we lost way more market share than we initially thought, which also showed us that we had basically, our predecessors had been subsidizing basically this product.
Yeah.
They had basically bought distribution by putting a lot of fridges everywhere where this product was in. And that was basically not, once you started really looking at allocating the proper cost, it didn't make any money.
So the initial costing system didn't provide a lot of transparency about those hidden costs, overhead costs, additional costs that would no.
There was a lot of things being done without proper analysis beforehand, and without knowing exactly all the facts. So, and we brought that in. And this is where Heineken is very good. They have a lot of these tools where they say, we want you to do activity-based costing because you will find it's a very powerful tool when doing negotiation. I'll tell you a little story about that, which I always also tell often to your students, is that we also had a mainstream spirits portfolio, which was like cheap alcohol, not cheap alcohol, but very properly prepared alcohol, so completely legal, with some flavoring and some color. And you could make a gin then, and you could make a whiskey, and that would often go to the larger hotels for the all-inclusive hotel business. And all of a sudden, a legal mainstream spirits producer in Egypt also went into beer because he wanted to take a bigger share of the all-inclusive market. And we had all the beer, and he had already a foot in the door with his illegal spirits that were not as good as quality control, and he definitely didn't pay his taxes. And he wanted to compete more with us. And our mainstream spirits portfolio was probably less than 5% of our profit, and was really not something we put a lot of effort in. Yeah. And the initial reaction to when he came with beer was to say, okay, let's lower some prices on beer so that we can compete with this guy. But beer was our profit pool. Yeah. And I said, well, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense at all. We should attack his profit pool. His profit pool is spirits. We have a category in spirits that doesn't contribute a lot to our profit. We can bleed on that one. So we cut prices a lot on mainstream spirits. Yeah. So we pushed them on that part.
So a game theoretic background in economics kind of helped you in
that respect, so his profit pool versus our profit pool, tit for tat. Why would I sort of like touch the geese with the golden eggs? Why would I strangle that one if I have a asymmetrical response that I can utilize far better? And that's what we did. We squeezed our own mainstream spirit portfolio. And that's hurt him so much that basically he put up a white flag. And he said, okay, I get it. You do your thing, I'll do my thing. And
then everyone had their turf.
Well, he continued doing that thing, and that was not really part of our core product. Yeah. And we continued in beer, which we considered to be our core product, and where we really had invested a lot in quality, and it was really a thing of pride with Heineken, obviously, and we also produced Heineken in Egypt, which was a big deal. And that's like there's so many quality controls around that. It's such a of course the cornerstone of the company is that brand, and you have no idea how how important it is that is up to the right quality level. So we really had that working for us, and we wanted to build on that one. So that's always an interesting one to share, because using basically activity-based costing, cost allocation insights, and using that in a proper way had a huge impact. And we basically could manage that competitive story quite well using those insights. So I did spend quite 4.5 years in Egypt. Enjoyed myself tremendously. Also built a team with more local people. I had I had one expat working for me when I joined in Egypt, but when he left, I promoted people from within, younger people, younger Egyptians. And some of them actually ended up going to Amsterdam and becoming expats themselves, which is always a source of pride for me that, we gave them a shot, and actually they performed.
Made the best out of it.
They made the best out of it, and they really got an international career out of it. And I think I was one of the first to do that I sort of like had somebody promoted, and then he went abroad, and that created a huge uplift in the entire team, right? Everybody saw, hey, wait a minute, it's not just the foreigners coming to Egypt, it's also the Egypts going to Europe. And that's how it can work. And I think that was very, very powerful at that time when that happened for the first time.
I can imagine.
Yeah. So, and I'm still in contact with these people out of that time. So it unfortunately ended when I already had decided that, my next job would be in Amsterdam at the head office. That it coincided with Arab Spring. So
what was that like?
Scary. I had a wife and two lovely children that you can see here on the picture. At that time, there were like probably 7 and 4. And all of a sudden, everything is shut down. Internet is shut down. You can't use the phone. You can't use an ATM. Petrol stations and shops are empty within 24 hours. And you don't know where to go.
Were you living in one of those compartmentalized areas at the time?
We were living in sort of like where also Egyptians lived, by the way, like a compound, but not a high security compound, just a fenced community, but not something with guards and with weapons or something, just a wall and a few gates. So we were living there. Fortunately, Heineken has some experience in working in companies where regimes are not always that stable. So they were very fast in their response in getting us evacuated. But for 48 hours, it was pretty intense.
I can imagine.
So you basically pack one bag each with your photos, your passports, and some documents, and you get out of there.
Okay. So that ended the Egyptian chapter.
That was a bit of a not the best ending of what was for the rest a very interesting and fun time also for my family to be there and to experience that. So and then I was at the head office at Heineken, and there I was sort of like responsible for the governance cycle for sort of the global business controller, but that was more of a staff role, and I discovered about myself I'm not really good in those roles. I don't really enjoy those roles that much, where I'm sort of like in the back seat and I'm more driving the process rather than the outcome. And that's something you have to learn about yourself, right? So I didn't really enjoy that. And obviously Heineken is not a travel agency, so I couldn't say, well, just send me back. I'll take Italy this time, or Spain, or send me to Mexico. So at some point, I thought it was just better to part ways. And I still love the company, but I also just wanted to enjoy myself and do something in terms of work that I got energy from. So I joined Cannondale. Which at that time was part of a conglomerate, Dorel. It was part of Dorel Sports. And so it's high performance bikes, racing bikes, mountain bikes, big business in Europe, mainly in the high performance end. So Cannondale was the largest brand there. But there I could use some of my lessons coming out of Heineken. They had basically too many SKUs. I applied activity-based costing again. I said, well, wait a minute, we have like these 10 SKUs that turn out to make 90% of our profits, and then we have a large collection that renews every year, and that we need to manage how we price that once we start introducing a new collection.
Yeah.
We had also the move for more and more bike manufacturers that would go online, so they would just sell direct to consumers and not use a dealer,
Cutting out the
middleman.
Yeah.
And so we still use dealers, but we also had people knocking on the door that said, well, we want to buy a lot of Cannondales from you and we'll sell them online. So we had to manage that because we didn't want to have this sort of like channel shift happening without our control.
Yeah.
And so what we did, and this is where finance meets business again, is we looked at sort of like value-added pricing. So we made a pricing model that says, okay, this is the list price, and the more you provide services to the consumer, the lower your list price becomes. So a dealer who offers a full assortment and does servicing on your bike, et cetera, got a better margin than a web shop. Yeah. So that at least you can hold,
you can balance it.
You can balance it out, and you can sort of like make it more fair. And that actually also increased or improved the conversation our salespeople had with the dealers. They said, okay, but if you do this for me, I can give you more discount, right? I can give you more margin. So it actually became a great tool. Yeah. But I really was an educator as well there, because I really had to explain to that company at that time in Europe, sales was running everything. And they were completely revenue focused, but margin and cash were at a very bad state. They were.
That's interesting. Was it because they were coming from this growth mindset, or?
Growth mindset, and what you will often find is that it all depends what finance was like before you joined, right? Was finance already a business partner, or was finance more like a bookkeeping function? And then, if finance is a bookkeeping function, they just try to keep up, and they just try to administer what they get in information. Yeah. So that's not the role I play. I play the role of, okay, I want to be at the front end of the decision-making process, so that I can make certain that we capture the value that we need to capture. We actually make a smarter decision, and that you have to earn. Nobody's going to give you that because you come in and you say, well, I'm the CFO, this is how we're going to run things now. You have to earn that position by showing that when you come into the conversation, the pricing, the margin, the cash flow becomes better.
Yeah. So what does it take then to be a good business partner, to be an actual partner at the table when decisions are being taken from your perspective?
Yeah.
So you have to know obviously the nuts and bolts of the business. You have to know, of course, also your finance part really well. Is there something else that you would say is important in that respect?
So I always say you need to get into that room, right? So when a big decision is being made, they need to say like, okay, let's get Michel in here, because when he comes in, we will get a better decision. So that needs to be an automatism, not something that they feel like they need to do, but they want it. And you earn that by what I call then the sort of like the 6I model. I think it maybe, if we see if I have the clicker and it works. Yeah. So the 6I model, I think it's not mine. I think it's some consultant came up with it at some point, and it's, I think, originally the 5I model. So it's about information, insight, influence, intervention, impact. But I've added incentive. Because often you find that to make the impact, you need to add an incentive, or understand what already the incentives are, so that you cannot conflict with certain incentives, either explicit or implicit incentives. Right. So key is that you can quickly come with information that really gives insights into the business. So for example, when I joined Cannondale, I did that activity-based costing exercise, and I could actually explain to people, but wait a minute, guys. You are also focused on this newest Cannondale model, Super 6 Evo, that is so light and costs 10,000 euros retail. But actually, we make more money on this 2,000 euro bike, that is in all shops, at least 10 of them. Yeah. And that's our bread and butter, right? So that's where we make the money, and where we sort of like feed the interest in the brand, and where we please a very high demanding consumer is this high-end model. Yeah. But that high-end model, not everybody can buy or wants to buy or needs to buy a 10,000 euro bike. So we need to be very careful how many of those we put in our supply chain, how we deal with that, where do we place them, really, and try to manage their value a lot better. And for example, the bread and butter bikes, they always need to be on stock. They always need to be available. And then I had to explain to people, okay, but wait a minute. I could see that some customers were paying very late, but I could also see that they had already reordered a lot of these bread and butter bikes where they had not paid for the earlier bikes. I said, well, wait a minute. You've already sold the other ones. You're reordering. Why are we not getting paid for the fact you've already, they had sometimes terms of 90 days.
Oh, wow.
And I went like, we're not a bank. No. So I had to explain.
Working capital management.
Yeah. So I had to explain to my salespeople, look, if you're revenue focused, that's fine. But, if I would pay your salary in 90 days, what would you say, right? So I try to also teach them a bit about the relationship between revenue, margin, and cash. Those were also levers in a negotiation. And margin you need to manage out of the gate by making the right choices in pricing and when do you discount and how much do you keep in stock. But also, for example, you could go to a dealer and say, well, also take this bike and take some apparel, because then you get a better mix. And terms. So, and I really went to customers in markets and with account managers and had conversations about the customer's financials and said, well, wait a minute, you've already reordered, but you haven't paid me for the previous order. So, excuse me. So that was really something that we needed to educate people on.
And then eventually also that chapter at Cannondale came to an end. And then you did something really different, I think, at least from my perspective, because you ventured out into the flower business.
Yeah.
So what was that like?
That was very interesting. Maybe to link it again to the model here that we're showing. I literally came into a business that had been founded by a family. They were really farmers basically, but entrepreneurial farmers, and had really built a large rose growing farm in Ethiopia. And private equity had come in because they wanted to have a larger share in Africa. And the family wanted to de-risk a bit and also make certain that the father and the two sons, that the father could step out a bit and then there would be some money available via the new investors to sort of like split the pie evenly. So it was also a good way to manage succession. And but there they always managed the company very well themselves on the basis of cash. They had 3 bank accounts. They got paid very quickly in the Netherlands because the fact that they were part of the Royal Flora Holland, the flower auction here, famous in the Netherlands. They paid their suppliers on time. They had only a few suppliers, so they knew exactly what sort of like was their cost base, their burn rate. And basically at the end of the year, basically their equity was basically sitting on one account, on one bank account, and they could literally say, well, this is how much money we earned this year. So they didn't need a large admin. They were like...
No sophisticated accounting there.
No KPIs, the KPIs is, okay, what's the temperature tonight? And, exactly. And what's this new yield going to be on this new flower? And that they knew by intuition, by their rule of thumb. They didn't need any sophistication. But then a PE firm from the UK came in, and we got financing from IFC, which is related to the World Bank. That doesn't work anymore, right? There needs to be a bit more. And it took, in that system, 12 months to report.
Oh, wow, okay.
Yeah. But I came in and they were like, okay, you're CFO, so, you just start doing the bookkeeping. I said, well, that's not what I do. But and if I do that, it's very expensive bookkeeping.
Exactly.
So I come here to help you to make certain that you can demonstrate to other stakeholders how you're creating value, and I'm also here to help you to create even more value, right? But in order to do that, we need to change a few things. But it's very interesting to work as a financial in a company that has never had a finance function that has been part of any business decision.
Can imagine.
Then you have to earn your right, and that starts with getting information, but also really working on your relationship with the CEO and the business. So also going out there and taking care of things that have nothing to do with finance. looking at HR. I looked at ESG policies.
Yeah.
I talked to stakeholders from the outside.
Yeah.
Went to customers so that I could understand the business, and then I could add, wait a minute, if we do this, we get a different margin profile, or if we do this, this will improve the way we make money.
Yeah. So how was it like to think about ESG back in these days? So was I can imagine growing flowers in Ethiopia and then selling them in the Netherlands. That comes at a relatively high carbon footprint also, because I assume this needs to be flown over by plane.
By plane.
Was there a lot of consideration for these kinds of things, or was it more about, let's say, the social aspects, perhaps helping within the local community within Ethiopia? Or
all of that, all of the above. The family themselves had a very, I would say, pragmatic and down-to-earth approach to taking care of the community, because they built a huge farm. They needed a lot of workers. Once you have a lot of workers, you need to take care of them. Yeah. So they built a hospital. They built schools. Wow. And they started with one classroom and they started with a small clinic. But by the time I came, it was a full primary, and it was a full high school with at least I think like 3,000 to 6,000 children on there.
Okay.
Yeah, fully part of the P&L of the business. So it was not something that we did on the side and we funded a bit. Yeah. No, it was integral part, fully integrated, as well as the hospital. So it had, and that was, I think it's also, if we actually go back on that slide that I have here, you see here a picture of me with Ethiopian school children. So I think that was so powerful to see that in one generation, but through the power of education, you could literally change a family's social economic status. Yeah. So we had people that were illiterate. They had children going to our schools, and their children would go to university.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah. So that's amazing, right? Yeah. So, and the family had done that not out of some sort of outside pressure on ESG, but they had just said, I need to take care of these people. They work for me. Yeah. So if they get sick, there needs to be a hospital. If they cut their hand, they need to go to a hospital. And their children need to get an education. Yeah. So that they had done was part of their complete cost. And then there were more and more pressure on, okay, you're using water. What are you doing with your wastewater? Right. What are you doing with your carbon footprint, as you're mentioning that, how you're managing that? So I spent a lot of time as a non-ESG expert putting that in all sort of like in perspective, and then also explaining then how the company was dealing with that. So the company was using a system of wastewater treatment using natural resources. So they were using reed beds, they were using filtration systems to clean the wastewater. They had a full recycling program, but they were shipping those flowers via the airport to Europe. On the other hand, if you then, if it becomes an accounting exercise, you have to be always careful, but flowers eat CO2, right? So they eat carbon. So there's a balance
true,
there.
But
yeah.
Well, they also re-emit it, right?
Yeah.
But
what we did, of course, is what we made certain of is that we had a lot of packaging efficiency. And but what has happened is that the market for growing affordable flowers that so like somebody can afford on a retirement pension, has gone completely out of Europe. Yeah. So we used to have that, but it's just not affordable anymore because of the gas prices. Yeah. So instead of using gas, we use sunlight in Ethiopia. Yeah. And they also used natural pesticides, so using a lot of different
bugs
bugs to treat a lot of the other plagues. So, and as it more and more how we explained that, more and more became also clear, for example, to our finances. So wait a minute, these people are actually doing a lot of good stuff, and it's actually quite a good role model. And let's also take that into account when we're looking at sort of like other agricultural ventures.
Yeah, definitely. I think you have to look at the alternative. So given that people want to buy flowers, if you would produce them in the Netherlands in one of those I would say,
greenhouses,
then using a lot of gas and perhaps pesticides that may also not be ideal. So it's good probably to think about how you can optimize within the constraints that you have, right?
Exactly. And what we were trying to do was take our principles and see how they were scalable to small farm holders in Ethiopia themselves, because they were often using the most severe pesticides. They were because they couldn't afford anything else. And they were using very ancient techniques to irrigate, which didn't separate the wastewater anymore. So that was a larger issue, right? If you are at scale, you can do other things, and you can do things that are mitigating your impact on the environment.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, oftentimes these things come with a high investment in some sort of fixed asset.
Yeah,
right?
and knowledge and expertise, which you then try to share. So there were a lot of initiatives on that going on as well. But that was a business then owned by PE, and we sold that to another private equity firm, and they had already businesses in Kenya and in UK related to flowers and vegetables. And I was like the CFO for like 12 months of that combined entity. But that really was like more like a governance CFO role, I would have to say. So I was sitting on the holding, things were consolidated. I wasn't playing the business part.
Sitting it out, but
no, not sitting it out, but really feeling like, okay, we either there's a new mission and we start really looking at that mission and it becomes part of our day-to-day management activity, or it's best you sort of like we part ways, and they were working on it, but it took a bit too long, and by that time I was a bit already like worn out and had explored other options, and then it really became time to move on, and that's when I joined Sentia.
So it's interesting, right? It's some sort of venture from really kind of the consumer goods, petrochemical, and then over time, this shift to digital services. It's interesting. It kind of mirrors a little bit the overall developments, I think, that we have seen over the past 20 years or so. So Sentia.
Yeah, Sentia is a managed cloud service provider that was owned by another private equity firm, and had done a lot of what they call buy and build. So they had a presence in the Netherlands, Denmark, and Belgium. And what they did, they had their own cloud, so that's called a private cloud solution. But we were helping actually our customers to basically migrate to the cloud, right? Or optimize within the cloud, or so. So we were like also.
So there's a private cloud, and that means people have their own space there, but probably perhaps also for GDPR reasons within a certain country or something like that, and then
now private cloud is more that, say, a company has their own cloud facilities, right? So we had our own data centers, and so we had our own assets, and then we would provide either infrastructure as a service or platform as a service. And that obviously meant that we had to invest in data centers and server capacity, but it also meant that we had like the full margin on this. And then public cloud is that you buy already the sort of like the infrastructure as a solution from Azure or AWS or any other of the large hyperscalers that are out there now, owned by Microsoft or Amazon. And more we saw that customers wanted to have public cloud, because the public cloud comes with a whole ecosystem of all kinds of other applications, database applications, analytical applications, payment engines, you name it. But actually the bread and butter of what most of our customers needed was just infrastructure as a service, platform as a service. So often we offered a hybrid solution. So they had part of their solutions on our private cloud, and they had part of our solutions on the public cloud. And we would manage that all entirely for them.
I see.
But that business was then sort of like operating in two worlds. The sort of like private cloud was for a while considered to be old, and everything was going to be the new kid on the block, which is public cloud. But we saw more and more that it's actually a hybrid model, because public is a pay as you go, and the more you click on, the more you pay, and often you don't need all those extras, right? So for our added value was that we could help the customers manage their guardrails, as we called it, so that they could
within
manage
cost limits.
But manage actually their spend.
Which
is actually very interesting, because nowadays as a CFO, if you are in any company, even if you're in a Heineken or a Shell, a lot of your data will be in some sort of cloud environment.
Yeah.
But who is actually managing the sort of like budgetary settings on that, right? Who's controlling the cost? Because it's quite easy to turn something on.
I have an example from the university where we used to use one of these Google queries, and if you suddenly run a query on a very large database, then you can incur quite a high cost with one click of a button.
So I always said to my CFO peers, like, make certain you get involved in that one, because there are ways that you can actually manage your cloud environment and manage your spend on that. But this is where I really learned and saw that, software, as Mark Andreessen says, software is eating the world. Software is really reshaping the nature of the firm.
Definitely.
And the nature of the firm is, I think, what always drives the nature of the CFO role. And depending on the type of firm, what the firm does, and sort of like the life cycle stage the firm is in.
Yeah.
So if you're in an asset-rich, asset-heavy, let's say it like that, long-term business, like 40-year planning horizon, like Shell, that's a different CFO role than if you're in a SaaS business, software as a service business, where you deploy maybe a solution every 3 months. Right.
So we could probably also say that really, this has shaped the role of the CFO over time. And technological shifts.
Yeah, you see that there are sort of like CFO-like type roles popping up, right? All of a sudden you have a chief revenue officer in certain businesses.
I haven't heard about that.
So a lot of businesses where you have a dynamic pricing model, or you have a number of products you're offering that can be deployed in software solutions, you need to make certain that you manage all the parameters around that, and hence a chief revenue officer often comes in.
Interesting.
And because you have such a rich maybe suite of solutions with different pricing models, and it doesn't really take a lot of effort to introduce a new product, because it can be just an extra bit of code. How do you price it then? How does it relate to your other products? How do you optimize then? How do you ensure conversion when a customer comes into you, or you offer a solution? How does that affect their conversion? So you see.
So it's an intersection role between, let's say, marketing, sales, and really the CFO function?
No, it's a role that I think, you will have companies that are maybe in hotel and bookings, or like a platform services like Uber or all of these type of companies that will have somebody that will be looking at optimizing, revenue and all the transactions around revenue. As well as you have now a lot of companies that have a CDO, a chief digital officer, which also sits a bit on the chair of the CFO. Not exactly the same chair, but they will look at all these sort of like data processes within the company and try to optimize those and make data more and more part of the decision making in the company. So I know that Heineken has a CDO. That used to be a CIO. There wasn't a board function. But now it's a role in the top of Heineken, right? Because the consumer journey, the supply chain journey has so many data points. Making use of the right cloud and other solutions to optimize that is critical.
The advent of a lot of data has really driven, I think, a lot of transformations in business. So, do you see in your daily work the impact of AI already, manifesting itself? Has it changed or shaped the way you work now as a CFO?
It's not shaping the way I work now today, but it's going to shape it a lot. So because it's changing again the nature of firms, right? So there is a lot of AIs out there, of course, and AI now is a buzzword, and
it's an umbrella term.
It's an umbrella term, nearly, and. I think I'm just trying to get through this book of Nick Bostrom called Super Intelligence. It's a bit of heavy reading, but I really try to keep up to date with these things. You can nearly call it sometimes alien intelligence, right? It's going to be intelligence that is something that we haven't seen before. It's not going to be human intelligence with perhaps a lot of cognition and any emotions in there. Not likely, but it's going to be in some ways freakish in terms of what it can do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, there, of course, I think when we're talking about this artificial general intelligence that may or may not be, on the horizon in a couple of years ago, I think this is going to be a very, very interesting development. And indeed, the question is, can we model it in such a way that it kind of respects human values that we have defined as a society, right? So I think there's a lot of research also right now in terms of how we can align also then these new artificial intelligences that may come out with the values that we have. And there is a risk, obviously, that if this goes wrong, then the AI may, optimize in the wrong way, and that may have grave consequences.
I think the biggest risk is that it starts basically biohacking our sort of like our compassion and our emotions. So like social media is already hijacking our attention. But if you have an AI interfacing with you that can also sort of like tap into your emotions and you get attached to the AI trying to act like a human, I think that could potentially be very, very consequential. So I think very important is going to be is that we always know that an AI is an AI and not a AI pretending to be a human.
Yeah.
And that we keep the domains where AI is active quite separate.
Yeah.
So, but obviously in medicine, in companies, AI is going to be a game shifter in remodeling processes, in getting things faster to the market, and in debugging. Code writing will become something you can do. You can do plug and play. Why would you don't have to spend maybe a lot of years learning that anymore. You could probably ask an AI to say, well, I want to make an app that does this and this. Can you write the code?
That's pretty close to that. I mean, at least if you want to have a template for something nowadays and that you can just then customize to your own requirements, it saves so much time.
Yeah, so it will be a great, so augmented intelligence, augmented productivity is gonna skyrocket again because you have these tools that are using some type of artificial intelligence to help you.
Yeah.
And that will for sure have a huge impact. But it will also, like a lot of these revolutions, there are intended and unintended consequences. and some of them, I think we're right to say, look, we have to be careful. And regulation is always slow to catch up. Right?
Yeah. So, I have to say I'm very optimistic about these developments. I see some of the risks, but also the potential is so enormous. I have great trust that this will really change things for the better. I'm
also a tech optimist. I'm not a tech pessimist. I'm not one of these people that thinks we're all going to die and we need to find John Connor and
Skynet
because Skynet is going active. So, but I do see that we need to understand it better. So I definitely try to keep abreast of it on those developments. Yeah. But needless to say, it will again, make transactions, and the basic of economics in some cases, how you look at a firm is basically how complex and how costly is the transaction. The more costly and the more complex, the more likely it is that you need a firm to regulate it. Yeah. If that becomes less and less costly and less difficult, the nature of the firm will change.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so and hence also and I don't believe that there's one type role model of the CFO. The CFO is also very much situational and dispositional. So it depends on the type of company, where the company is at. Yeah. And it's also your personality, right? So you can have extreme entrepreneurial CFOs. You can have extreme more governance and risk focused CFOs. Yeah. And if you have a governance risk focused CFO, you're sitting on a large holding that has been already existing for 100 years with assets that last for 50 years, then that's probably the right place for that CFO to be. Yeah. If you're more an entrepreneurial CFO and you're very much interested in tech, you'll probably be working for some sort of software company and trying to sort of like make certain that that growth that company is having actually also translates into profit and cash, right? So and that's where you see the role of the CFO will be. But generally you see it's more and more moving towards data understanding data, understanding the architecture of your data environment, understanding where your data comes from and how that supports your growth model.
Now going back a little bit into the human domain, then after having talked about AI and stuff, are there? I mean, looking back onto your the long career that you have had, are there any, mentors or kind of very important persons in your life that have really shaped or created a pivotal moment that have, turned your how should I say, turned your career one way or another, or affected it in any particular way?
Yeah, I was thinking about that on the way over. I don't think I had sort of like one person that really had such a pivotal role, but I have, of course, had people that I worked with or for that had quite an important effect on me in terms of how they operated. So I had a boss, for example, in Egypt who was very energetic, demanding in terms of wanting to make things a success, expecting a very strong CFO besides them. And also not afraid saying, oh, Michel, you're not there yet, right? So I need you more visible next to me. And that's very helpful, right? If you get that type of feedback and that you can then work on it, because then it was just a question, okay, what exactly are you looking for? Well, I expect more and more of this type of interventions. I expect more interaction in these areas. So that has really helped me to basically pick up my game, because I'm naturally somebody who is also interested in actually understanding the numbers, wants to spend some time in a spreadsheet in the books and goes like, what's going on here? But you also need to build a relationship with your CEO. You need to build a relationship with your management team peers and with your team. So I've learned that you can do both at the same time. And that is actually something I enjoy doing, by the way. So but it's important that people point that out and expect that from you. So I had a few of those bosses. I also had bosses that were in themselves probably a bit insecure and then focused too much on what, in my view, micro activities, which I didn't enjoy, which also taught me like, okay, I don't enjoy that. I shouldn't do that to people that work for me, right? Yeah. So I should not make that mistake when I talk to people that are going to work for me. So I've also learned from, let's say, not good examples. Yeah. Okay, that's not how I would like to do it. I would like to do it more like this. I would like to be more a boss that sits with his people and says like, okay, this is what we want to solve. How are we going to do it? Let's get all the ideas on the table. Oh, you have a good idea. You run with it and you ask for help when you need it. So that's the way I like to work with my people.
So managing people and giving them trust.
Giving them trust and giving them a mandate. Asking them how they want to do things, telling them what you want and why you want it, but then saying, okay, how are we going to do this? What's your idea? You run with it. I'm not good at hand-holding and day-to-day task management. That's a weak area. So I pick people that don't need that. Need
supervision.
No, they don't need supervision and that are self-starting and, start running with things. And that actually sometimes I have to catch up with them and go like, oh, where you're at now? Are you already doing that? Okay, great. Or maybe a bit of nudging in another direction, right? So, but
mostly results orientation.
Yeah, I'm all about the output, and making certain that my people then get the right tools and that they develop, right? So that they develop their interaction and intervention skills, that they spend some time in building their relationship with their business peers, that they become, in a way, also better storytellers, right? So a lot of what we do in finance is telling a story about why something is happening. Why is this performance not going as it should? Why is this going well? Because we know X, Y, Z, because we have done this with pricing or this with product or this with our working capital or our inventory. And you need to be able to tell that in a way that everybody else who doesn't have an accounting degree, doesn't have a finance degree, understands that. And I think that's also probably a key success factor for a person working in finance wanting to become a CFO. You need to be able to take a step back and then tell the story. Well, I know accounting is not, it looks a bit like a secret language, but it's actually a story about how the company is doing. So that's I think critical in the in the role. So mentors, yeah, I think I had many, starting with my parents, obviously, and teachers, and but then also, you know, both good and bad bosses, and just people generally where you go like, okay, you know, he may be tough, but he's fair, and he's getting the best out of his people, right? And as long as it's going in a constructive way, then this is maybe also what I should do. I should try to emulate that behavior. Whereas you could also have people that are stressed, they want to get certain results, they then think they can shortcut it, and they become a bit annoyed and irritated, and that in general is counterproductive, right? So you learn that by seeing it and by doing it yourself, and discovering what you are good at, and is maybe something that is somebody else's weakness, and that you need to also cater for your weakness. I always say it's probably easier to avoid stupidity than always try to be brilliant, right? So I don't believe in, you know, you could have the social skills of Oprah, and you know, and you could have the charisma of, you know, some sort of superstar, but most of us don't. and so it's easier to go like, okay, I'm not good at task management, so let's not operate like that. Let's then get people around me that also don't need that, right? So because then
finding complements to your own abilities.
And managing that. Absolutely.
That's a great insight. Now, of course, then there's the professional Michel, who's you know, a CFO, working probably many hours per week. But there's also, of course, a private Michel, a father, a husband. So how do you manage the, let's say, the work-life balance? Of course, that's also kind of a buzzword nowadays, but I think there is also more awareness for, you know, actually balancing the demands from the job with kind of the things that you do at home, or that you find also enough time to relax, that you can spend enough time with people who are important to you. So how do you manage that, and do you perhaps have some good tips to people who struggle with that?
Well, you know, so first of all, you know, work somewhere where you enjoy working, right? So where the sort of like long hours you put into the work doesn't feel stressful, right? You can work hard but still enjoy yourself. So if the work itself is very stressful and you're struggling, then you have to wonder, sort of like, is this going to be sustainable for a longer period of time? I've discovered, I've worked in the startup where I said, and at some point didn't go well, put in a lot of hours. It wasn't the most enjoyable experience. It spills over into your private life. You know, you start thinking at night about things you have to do the next day. Your sleep suffers. You know, and hence you get irritable, that, you know, you might say things to your spouse that you shouldn't have said. So, you know, you have to make certain that the work itself is pleasant enough, hard working, but pleasant, the right colleagues, everybody's constructive. So at the end of the day, you don't feel drained. So that's key. I mean, you know, because you can't really separate the two. The two are connected because there's only one Michel, and then they have to all go through the same person. And then you need to find that, you know, you really need to also work on your recovery, right? So your recovery should not be something you do by accident. It should be just something you really plan for, and not planning in a very complicated way, but consciously, you know. So I like to keep fit, so I do, you know, exercise. You see the weights here. I like to lift heavy stuff. I like to do something with a bit of cardio. I've done boxing. I now use mainly, you know, biking as a way of doing my cardio fitness. But I make that a regular thing, and not just a thing I do in the weekends. Now, you know, I will get up early, or if I have an hour between calls, I will do something that keeps me fresh and fit. And the weekends in general, unless there is something really big going on, you know, it should be, you know, a period of time for rest and recovery, seeing friends and spending time with your family. So that's how I try to do it. And I have periods, you know, I work in businesses that have processes where you have an exit. If you are in an exit process and you're doing due diligence and you have a lot of things going on, you know, there will not be a lot of time in the weekends for those things. And that's when, it's important that your family is aware of that.
Yeah.
And your family is supportive of that, right?
Yeah.
So my wife is very supportive.
Yeah.
She understands what I do.
Yeah.
And she understands that it will come, that there will be periods where,
it's a defined time frame.
Yeah,
right?
so I'm working my ass off in a certain time frame.
Yeah.
But it's for, a good cause.
Yeah.
And she generally finds that if I do that and I can do that unencumbered, that it doesn't really affect my mood in a negative way, right? So, because if I would have a negative mood, that will obviously have a spin-off.
Yeah.
So, but it's important to have, everything in your personal life should be a bit in order.
Yeah.
Because if you have 2 young children and both of them are sick, and a lot of them are crying, and you have a lot going on in your work, I don't know. Nobody I think is born here with an S on their chest, that they can manage that all and not feel it, right? So you have to also know where you are in your life and what you can handle.
True.
Because I personally believe, stress, not all stress is bad.
No, I agree.
And some stress is just good to get you going
and motivating.
Get motivated. Stress that doesn't really get resolved and stays with you for a long time. Well, you don't have to be a psychologist, but that literally creates the burnout, I think. And that you have to set your limits, and you have limits. So finding out your limits early in your career, I had my twister time is where I learned my limits.
Yeah.
Hey, wait a minute. I can't sleep properly anymore. I'm thinking too much about work. Probably need to do something about that. So,
I think these are important insights, right? Being conscious about what you can and perhaps cannot do within a certain time frame. Having routines for rest and recovery, sports, whatever makes you happy, makes you relaxed. Having an environment that is supportive. That is.
And the more experience you become as a CFO, the quicker you also can see. Okay, wait a minute. This is going to take some time to solve. And then you can also manage expectations. And you can say, wait a minute, so this is an issue here. We need to debottleneck this department. We have a lack of controls. Okay, this is what's going to take to get to a certain level. And if you can't get there fast enough, this is the sort of like extra steps we need to take, because otherwise it's just going to create more stress in the organization. That comes from experience. That, that you can't really write that down in a book. You have to, I can now walk into a company and after 2 months go like, okay, this is not working, that's not working, that's not working, probably because A, B, and C. Probably solutions are X, Y, Z. X is going to be fast, Z is going to take a long time. So that's the benefit of experience. And then you can have a conversation with your owners, your peers, and say, okay, how do we prioritize? What do we manage first? Because I can't manage it all at the same time, right? So that's also where you manage your own funnel, your own path, so that it doesn't have to happen at the same time.
I think experience is a great keyword. So obviously you have accumulated a lot of experience over your career. Now, and of course, there are lots of students who also think they want to have a successful financial career. Is there any advice that you could give to our young students who want to make a successful career in a finance function? Is there something that you would want them to give them on their way so that they become successful?
I would say figure out who you are, right? So Aristotle, know thyself. So try to figure out what makes you productive and what you enjoy in your work. Because I could say, a lot of students will probably maybe begin their career with a Big Four in accountancy and say, that's a good place to start. And I would not disagree, right? That's a good place to start because you will learn fundamentals. And I explained in the beginning, I still use all the fundamentals. But you will maybe discover that's completely not your thing, right? So, and then don't be afraid, that's probably the next advice, to switch, to try a different path, to do something else, right? So it doesn't have to be this choice. You can switch a lot early in your career. You can try things and you can try and fail, and at least you've tried something, and then you've learned something.
And usually it doesn't have that grave consequences when you're still young.
Yeah, you don't have a mortgage, you don't have kids.
Yeah, exactly.
Why not start your own business?
Yeah.
Why not start an own company and see how you can make it work?
Yeah.
It may fail, but maybe you've learned a lot about, setting up a company, getting funding, making a business plan, all of those things that later in your career will serve you extremely well, right? So I think probably knowing what I know about myself now, I might have done that after I graduated, especially in this day and age where there are so many opportunities to, with low cost, to really get maybe an app going, a piece of software going, and really expand from there. Yeah. When I graduated in 1996, it was not that much still happening. You could do something in computers, you could do something in the internet, but it was a lot harder to envision how you would do that.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, these were really completely different times. So be passionate, take risks. And
passionate is a bit of an allergic word for me, because I think passionate is oversold. Most people that tell you follow your passion, they tend to have made millions and billions in insurance or real estate. So I can't really imagine that was their passion. But pick those things that give you energy and that you enjoy doing and that you're good at. People will pay you more for stuff that you're really good at, right? So, and discover that about you. So
and develop skills.
And develop skills in that, So, I'm good at presenting. I'm good at diagnosing the financial state of a company. I'm good at working with people to fix stuff. So that's what I'm good at. Yeah. So I tend to look for opportunities that create that. I like working in international environments. Yeah. I can work with a lot of different cultures. So I like to do those kind of things. I like to learn. I like to be in new environments. So I can switch companies every 3-4 years and industries as well, and still pick up all the fundamentals relatively quickly and translate them to my sort of like financial toolkit. Yeah. I like doing that. That's what gives me energy. I actually am good at that. And hence people are willing to sort of like reward me for that and ask me to do that. Yeah. And that then coincides with what, gives me energy and makes me successful. But my passion, could be something completely outside of that, right? Could be history, could be flower growing, could be you name it. Yeah. Have that passion, but it might not be the thing that is your career. So your career is, I think, where you are in a position because of your unique set of skills and talents to really have an impact. Yeah. So find out what that is and then go do that. Yeah. And because people will then say, hey, wait a minute, that's interesting. We want more of that. Let's get that person on board and be part of our organization. Yeah. So passion is a bit, that's too soft. That's a bit too wishy-washy.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah, we're still financial professionals after all. We like the quantification of things.
Yeah, but also I think there is some sort of there's some sort of like myth going around that if you follow your passion, everything will be okay. And I think that's a bit...
very often it's, of course, just selection bias. Yeah. By a chance, a person who followed their passion became successful, and then looking back, they can say, follow your passion. Yeah. It worked out for that one person, but perhaps not for the million other people who followed their passion and never made it anywhere.
So selection plus survivorship bias, then you can have people that talk about following their passion. But... no, find out what you're good at and what you enjoy. If that's the sweet spot.
I think that's a great conclusion for our talk today. So, Michel, thank you so much for coming here today to talk with me about your career, about the interesting anecdotes that you have shared, about your advice, and I hope to talk to you again in the future. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Stefan. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Thanks.
Thanks.